Ma'am, step away from the elevator and keep your hands where we can see them. The sentence hit the lobby like a fire alarm at 8:12 on a rainy Manhattan morning, sharp enough to turn every head near the marble reception desk of Meridian Global Holdings. Naomi Brooks didn't move right away. She stood there in a charcoal gray blazer, dark jeans, and low black heels, one hand resting lightly on the strap of her leather laptop bag, while two white security guards closed in around her like she'd triggered some invisible threat. Carl Benson, broad-shouldered and already impatient, pointed toward the metal detector beside the executive elevators. "You heard me," he barked. "Bag on the table. Now." The entire lobby slowed. Conversations faded. Coffee cups paused halfway to mouths. A man in a navy suit near the security gate lowered his phone just enough to watch. Naomi's face remained calm, but her eyes sharpened slightly, the kind of stillness that came from surviving moments exactly like this before. She had walked into boardrooms worth hundreds of millions of dollars without flinching. She had negotiated acquisitions across 3 states. But somehow, a black woman walking into a corporate tower alone still made certain people reach for authority before humanity. Derek Walsh, the younger guard standing beside Carl, folded his arms and stared at Naomi's visitor badge like it offended him personally. "Executive access?" he muttered. "Yeah, right." Naomi finally spoke, her voice low and measured. "I have a 9 a.m. board meeting." Carl laughed once under his breath. "Lady, people don't just wander into executive floors claiming they've got board meetings." A few employees near the elevators exchanged awkward glances. Nobody stepped in. Nobody said a word. The giant digital clock above reception ticked to 8:13 a.m. Naomi slowly placed her bag onto the inspection table without protest. Carl immediately unzipped it and began digging through it in full view of the lobby. Laptop charger, notebook, tablet, wallet, every movement louder than it needed to be. Derek shook his head dramatically. "You know what's funny?" he said loudly enough for nearby employees to hear. "The fake badges are getting better every year." Naomi looked directly at him. "Run my name." Derek smirked. "That's not how this works." Near the front desk, a young executive assistant named Emily Carter glanced nervously between Naomi and the security monitor beside her workstation. Something about the name sounded familiar. Very familiar. Before she could speak, the glass doors behind reception opened again, and Linda Whitmore stepped into the lobby in a cream-colored coat and heels sharp enough to echo against the marble floor. Meridian's chief operations officer moved with the confidence of someone used to controlling rooms before speaking. She stopped the second she saw Naomi standing beside the security table. Her eyes moved slowly over Naomi's clothes, her bag, her natural curls still damp from the rain outside. Judgment formed instantly. "What's going on here?" Linda asked. Carl gestured toward Naomi without hesitation. "Possible unauthorized access attempt," he said. Linda's expression tightened. "Executive floor?" Carl nodded. Linda let out a quiet scoff before turning toward Naomi. "This level isn't open to the public." Naomi held her gaze. "Good thing I'm not the public." That answer should have ended the conversation. Instead, it made Linda colder. "Then you won't mind cooperating." She motioned toward Naomi's laptop. "Open it." Emily looked up again, now visibly uncomfortable. The name finally clicked in her mind. Naomi Brooks. She had seen it less than an hour earlier attached to a confidential calendar entry marked Board Transition Meeting, Level 48. Her stomach tightened instantly. Carl pulled Naomi's tablet halfway from the bag, while Derek stepped closer, positioning himself between Naomi and the elevator like she might suddenly run. The humiliation wasn't subtle anymore. It was public theater. Naomi looked around the lobby slowly, taking in the silence, the staring faces, the employees pretending not to watch. She had seen this exact scene at 22 years old when a recruiter once asked if she was delivery staff inside a Chicago law office. She remembered standing there back then too, embarrassed, angry, invisible. But this morning felt different. This morning, the building they were trying to block her from no longer belonged to the people humiliating her. And none of them knew it yet. Naomi Brooks did not argue when Carl emptied the contents of her bag across the black granite inspection table. That was the part that unsettled Emily Carter the most. Most people would have raised their voices by now. Most people would have demanded a supervisor or threatened a lawsuit or stormed back out into the rain. Naomi did none of that. She simply stood there with one hand resting against the edge of the table, while the entire lobby watched two security guards treat her like a criminal in a building she technically already controlled. The massive LED screen behind reception flashed Meridian Global stock prices in soft blue light, while employees moved more slowly than usual, pretending to head toward elevators while secretly trying to hear every word. Linda Whitmore folded her arms tightly across her coat and studied Naomi with the kind of suspicion that had nothing to do with policy anymore. "You said you have a board meeting," Linda said coolly. "Who exactly invited you?" Naomi looked directly at her. "The board." Carl snorted under his breath, while Derek picked up Naomi's tablet and turned it over in his hands like evidence. "Funny," Derek said, "because people attending board meetings usually arrive through private access upstairs, not through the front door in jeans." Naomi's expression did not change. "Maybe the problem is what you think leadership looks like." The words landed harder than Derek expected. His smile faded slightly. Linda stepped closer before the silence could settle. "This company handles sensitive financial data," she said sharply. "Security has every right to investigate suspicious behavior." Suspicious. There it was again. The word wrapped in corporate language clean enough to sound reasonable while carrying something uglier underneath. Naomi had heard versions of it her entire career. Suspicious candidate. Suspicious access. Suspicious confidence. She remembered being 24 years old inside a Boston investment firm when a receptionist asked if she was there to clean conference rooms because she arrived carrying her own laptop instead of a designer handbag. She remembered a white executive once telling her she was surprisingly articulate after she closed a seven-figure negotiation. Every memory sat quietly behind her eyes now, while Carl continued searching through her belongings in front of half the company. Emily's pulse quickened as she opened the internal scheduling system beneath her desk. Her fingers trembled slightly against the keyboard. There it was again in bold lettering across the executive calendar. 9 a.m. transition session. Attendees, board members, legal counsel, Naomi Brooks. Emily looked up immediately toward Linda, then toward Naomi. Her throat tightened. Naomi was telling the truth. Worse than that, this was not just any meeting. This was the meeting. Rumors about Meridian Global's ownership change had spread quietly for weeks through executive offices and private investor calls. Nobody knew who the incoming controlling CEO would be. Emily suddenly realized she was standing 20 feet away from her. Derek unzipped the smaller pocket inside Naomi's bag and pulled out a silver access badge attached to a leather holder. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Where did you get executive clearance?" he asked. Naomi answered calmly. "From the company." Carl shook his head immediately. "People steal badges all the time." Emily finally stepped forward from reception before fear could stop her. "Actually," she said carefully, "I think her name might be on this morning's." Linda snapped toward her instantly. "Emily." The single word cut through the lobby like a blade. Emily froze. Linda's expression hardened. "Return to your desk." The younger woman swallowed hard and stepped back, but not before Naomi noticed the concern in her eyes. Naomi understood that look. It was the look people wore when they knew something wrong was happening but were afraid of what honesty might cost them. Carl pushed Naomi's laptop aside and crossed his arms. "Until we verify who you are," he said loudly, "you are not going anywhere near executive-level access." Naomi slowly glanced toward the private elevators behind him. Stainless steel doors, frosted glass walls. 48 floors above them, a boardroom full of executives was already gathering for a meeting that would change the company before lunch. And downstairs, the woman about to lead it was still being treated like she had wandered in off the street. The atmosphere inside Meridian Global's lobby no longer felt professional. It felt charged. Every few seconds another employee walked through the revolving doors, slowed down after seeing the scene near security, then quietly pretended to check emails while listening to every word. Naomi Brooks stood beside the inspection table with the same calm posture she had carried into billion-dollar negotiations, but the people surrounding her mistook composure for weakness. Carl Benson pushed her wallet aside with the back of his hand and looked toward Linda Whitmore. "No company credentials besides the badge," he said. "No executive escort either." Linda nodded once like that settled everything. "Exactly what I thought." Naomi looked directly at her. "And what exactly did you think?" Linda's lips tightened. I think people trying to force access into restricted executive areas usually have something to hide. The sentence landed heavily across the lobby because everyone understood what she really meant. Naomi noticed the silence immediately afterward. Nobody challenged it. Nobody corrected it. A white man in a tailored navy suit, standing near reception, glanced at Naomi briefly before whispering something to his coworker that made them both smirk. Another employee shook his head quietly and muttered, "This is getting ugly." Derek Walsh stepped even closer toward Naomi now, invading the small amount of space she still had left. "We can call the police if you want to keep making this difficult," he said. Naomi raised one eyebrow slowly. "Difficult?" Derek crossed his arms. "You walked into executive headquarters with a fake-looking badge and no authorization." Naomi's voice remained steady. "Run the badge." Carl immediately interrupted. "We already told you that is not how this works." Emily Carter sat frozen behind reception while her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She kept glancing between Naomi and the executive calendar still open on her monitor. Naomi Brooks. Board transition session. 48th floor. 8:45 arrival window. Everything matched perfectly. Emily swallowed hard before standing up again, despite the warning Linda had already given her. "Ma'am," Emily said carefully toward Linda, "I really think there may be some misunderstanding here." Linda turned sharply. "Sit down, Emily." "But her name is now." Emily stopped mid-sentence. The force in Linda's voice echoed through the marble lobby hard enough to make nearby employees look away. Naomi watched Emily carefully. Fear, conflict, conscience. She recognized all three instantly because she had worn them herself once. At 27, Naomi had worked inside another corporate tower downtown where an older white executive accused her of stealing confidential files simply because she stayed late after hours. Security escorted her out while employees watched silently from glass offices. The next morning, they discovered the files had been sitting on the executive's own desk the entire time. Nobody apologized. Nobody faced consequences. Naomi remembered standing on that sidewalk afterward, staring up at the building and realizing something painful. Success did not protect Black women from humiliation. Sometimes it only changed the address where it happened. Carl suddenly zipped Naomi's bag shut and slid it across the table harder than necessary. "Until we verify everything," he announced loudly, "you are not entering executive-level access points." Linda nodded approvingly before turning toward the front desk. "Call upstairs and let the board know there may be a delay due to a security incident." Security incident. Naomi almost smiled hearing the phrase. Corporate language had always fascinated her. Humiliation became procedure. Bias became concern. Discrimination became protocol. A younger employee standing near the elevators quietly pulled out his phone and started recording before quickly lowering it again when Derek noticed him. Linda stepped beside Naomi one final time. "You should leave while this stays professional," she said softly enough that only Naomi could hear. Naomi met. Her eyes completely unfazed. "Professional ended the moment your guards searched me like I was a criminal for walking into my own company." Linda laughed once under her breath. "Your company?" Around them, several employees exchanged awkward looks. Carl shook his head immediately. "Lady, do you even hear yourself?" Naomi slowly reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and removed her phone. No sudden movements. No anger. Just quiet precision. Then she pressed one number on the screen and lifted the phone calmly to her ear while the entire lobby watched. The lobby grew quieter the moment Naomi Brooks placed the phone against her ear. Even Carl Benson stopped moving for a second. There was something about the way she stood now that shifted the energy in the room. Not fear. Not panic. Precision. "Rachel," Naomi said calmly, "I need executive transition protocol activated immediately." Several employees exchanged confused looks near the elevators. Linda Whitmore folded her arms tighter. "This is getting ridiculous," she muttered. Naomi continued speaking into the phone as if nobody else existed. "Pull security footage from the main lobby beginning at 8:07 this morning. Freeze all access logs connected to executive security clearance. And patch the boardroom feed live once legal arrives." On the other end of the line, Rachel Monroe answered without hesitation. "Understood. Initiating transition protocol now." Carl let out a short laugh. "Transition protocol," he repeated mockingly. "What is this supposed to be, some television drama?" Derek smirked beside him. Probably calling a lawyer because she got caught. Naomi lowered the phone slowly, but did not respond to either of them. Linda stepped forward instead. Who exactly is Rachel? Naomi slipped the phone back into her blazer pocket. Someone who still has a job by noon. The sentence landed harder than anyone expected. Even Derek stopped smiling for a moment. Emily Carter stared openly now, her stomach twisting tighter by the second. She could feel the situation moving somewhere dangerous. Not dangerous in a physical way. Dangerous in the way careers collapse before people realize the floor beneath them is gone. She glanced again toward the executive calendar on her monitor, then toward Naomi, then toward Linda. Emily finally made a decision. Miss Whitmore, she said carefully, her voice shaking slightly. I really think you need to verify her identity before this goes any further. Linda turned immediately. Excuse me. Emily swallowed hard. Her name matches the transition meeting upstairs. Silence hit the lobby all at once. Carl looked toward Linda. Derek frowned. Several nearby employees slowly lowered their phones from their ears, pretending they had not been listening. Linda's expression hardened instantly. You are confused, she said sharply. No, ma'am, Emily answered quietly. I checked twice. Carl looked back at Naomi now with the first small crack of uncertainty in his face. Who exactly are you? Naomi met his eyes without blinking. I already told you to run my name. Derek scoffed quickly, trying to recover control of the moment. Anybody can put a fake name into a calendar. But his voice no longer sounded confident. Emily took another breath. The meeting was locked under executive legal clearance, she said. Only board-level authorization can access it. Linda's jaw tightened. Emily stopped talking. But the younger woman could not stop now. Something inside her had already crossed the line between fear and conscience. Her name was attached to the incoming executive transition file. Emily said softly. I saw it this morning. Around them, the atmosphere shifted again. Employees who had stayed silent now looked at Naomi differently. Not with sympathy anymore. With suspicion toward the people humiliating her. Carl slowly removed his hands from Naomi's bag. Derek stepped half a pace backward near the elevator. Linda noticed immediately, and her voice sharpened. Do not start second-guessing protocol because of rumors. Naomi almost smiled hearing that word again. Protocol. The favorite hiding place of cowards with authority. She remembered another morning 12 years earlier inside a Chicago finance tower when security guards forced her to wait in a service hallway while white interns walked freely into a recruiting event she had been invited to lead. Back then she stayed silent because she needed the opportunity. But standing here now inside Meridian Global's marble lobby, Naomi realized something had changed. She no longer needed permission to belong in rooms built with her own decisions. The soft ding of the private executive elevator suddenly echoed through the lobby. Every head turned at once. The stainless steel doors slid open upstairs access activated remotely from executive level. A tall gray-haired man in a navy suit stepped out carrying a leather portfolio under one arm. Richard Holloway, led legal counsel for Meridian Global and one of the most feared attorneys in corporate Manhattan. The second he saw Naomi standing beside the security table, his expression changed completely. Miss Brooks, he said immediately, we have been waiting for you upstairs. The entire lobby froze. The silence inside Meridian Global's lobby stretched so long it almost felt physical. Richard Holloway stood near the private executive elevator with reins still clinging to the shoulders of his navy overcoat, staring directly at Naomi Brooks like nothing else in the room mattered. Carl Benson slowly stepped away from the inspection table first. Then Derek Walsh followed. The confidence both men had carried minutes earlier drained from their faces all at once. Linda Whitmore, however, did not move. She stayed planted beside the security desk with her jaw tight and her posture rigid, refusing to surrender control of the moment. Richard looked from Naomi to the contents of her bag still spread across the granite table. His expression darkened immediately. What exactly happened here? He asked. Nobody answered. Naomi finally spoke instead. Your security team decided I looked suspicious. Richard's eyes shifted toward Carl. Suspicious. Carl swallowed once before answering. She attempted to access executive floors without verification. Naomi looked directly at him. I told you to verify me. Derek tried to recover some authority. We followed protocol. Richard's voice sharpened instantly. Protocol does not include publicly searching incoming executive leadership in the middle of the lobby. Several employees nearby lowered their eyes immediately. Linda finally stepped forward. Richard, nobody informed us this woman was part of the transition. The second the words left her mouth, the air changed again. This woman, not executive leadership, not Miss Brooks. Naomi noticed it. So did everyone else. Richard stared at Linda carefully. You were informed there would be a board transition this morning. Linda folded her arms tighter. Not her identity. Naomi almost smiled, hearing the bitterness beneath the sentence. Not her identity. Translation, not someone who looked like her. Emily Carter remained frozen behind reception, watching the entire scene unfold like a wall finally cracking open from pressure that had existed long before this morning. Naomi slowly reached toward the inspection table and picked up her tablet. Carl instinctively moved as if to stop her before quickly realizing how disastrous that would look now. Naomi noticed that too. Every person in the lobby suddenly seemed aware of cameras, witnesses, consequences. Richard adjusted the leather portfolio under his arm and spoke carefully toward Naomi. The board is assembled upstairs. They delayed the meeting until your arrival. Linda's face lost a little more color hearing that. The entire board? She asked quietly. Richard looked at her without emotion, including the Acquisition Council and Transition Committee. Derek's eyes widened slightly. Carl stared down at the marble floor. Naomi slid her tablet back into her bag with slow, deliberate movements, while memories pressed quietly against the back of her mind again. At 30 years old, she had once attended a leadership conference in Dallas, where hotel staff repeatedly assumed she worked event catering despite her keynote credentials hanging visibly around her neck. Every correction only embarrassed them, never changed them. That was the exhausting part. The burden always fell on Black professionals to prove humanity first and authority second. Naomi looked around Meridian's lobby now and realized this morning had never really been about her identity. It was about what the people around her believed power was supposed to look like. Linda suddenly straightened her posture again, grasping for control slipping through her fingers. Well, she said tightly, if there has been a misunderstanding, I am sure we can resolve it privately upstairs. Naomi looked directly at her. You searched me publicly. The sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. You accused me publicly, Naomi continued calmly. You questioned my access publicly. So no, Linda, we will not resolve this privately. Nobody in the lobby moved. Naomi stepped toward the executive elevator beside Richard while the crowd of employees slowly parted in silence. Then she stopped one final time and turned back toward Carl and Derek. Neither man could meet her eyes anymore. Naomi's voice stayed even. You searched a Black woman like she was dangerous because you could not imagine she belonged on the 48th floor. Linda immediately tried to interrupt. That is not what happened. Naomi turned toward her sharply for the first time all morning. Then explain why nobody searched the white executives walking through those same doors. Absolute silence followed. Heavy, crushing, unavoidable. Even the sound of the rain outside seemed distant now. Richard pressed the elevator button quietly while several employees near reception exchanged stunned looks. Emily Carter felt chills rise down her arms because deep down she realized something irreversible had just happened in that lobby. Not a misunderstanding, not an awkward moment, a reckoning. The private executive elevator rose through Meridian Global in complete silence except for the faint mechanical hum behind the walls. Naomi Brooks stood beside Richard Holloway with one hand resting lightly against her leather bag while Manhattan disappeared floor by floor beneath them through narrow strips of tinted glass. Richard glanced toward her carefully. The board has no idea what happened downstairs yet, he said quietly. Naomi kept her eyes forward. They will. Richard nodded once. Rachel already transmitted the lobby footage to legal review. Naomi finally looked at him. Good. On the other side of the city, thousands of employees were already logging into computers, joining conference calls, pouring coffee, completely unaware that Meridian Global's leadership structure had begun changing before business hours even started. Naomi had spent 8 months engineering the acquisition through layered investment groups, private equity partners, and silent board negotiations. By 10 o'clock that morning, she would officially control the company. Yet less than 20 minutes earlier, security guards downstairs had treated her like someone trying to sneak into a building she now owned. The irony almost exhausted her more than it angered her. The elevator doors opened onto the 48th floor with a soft metallic sound. The atmosphere upstairs felt completely different from the lobby below. Quiet carpeting, frosted glass offices, long walls lined with abstract artwork and framed financial headlines from Meridian's 30-year history. A receptionist near the boardroom immediately stood when she saw Naomi. "Good morning, Miss Brooks." Respect. Immediate. Effortless. The kind nobody questioned once power became visible. Naomi noticed it instantly. So did Richard. Interesting how quickly people recognize authority once they are told where to look, Naomi said quietly. Richard gave a small, uncomfortable smile, but did not answer. Across the floor, several executives near the conference area straightened the second Naomi appeared. Some had met her before through acquisition meetings. Others only knew her by reputation. Young, brilliant, ruthless in negotiations. The woman who turned a struggling logistics startup into a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure empire before turning 35. None of them looked confused seeing her there. None of them asked for identification. None of them searched her bag. Naomi paused outside the massive glass boardroom doors for one brief second. Inside, 12 board members sat around a polished walnut table beneath soft recessed lighting. Financial reports glowed across built-in screens. Coffee cups steamed beside stacks of transition documents. Conversations inside the room immediately stopped the moment she entered. Chairman Arthur Bell rose first. "Miss Brooks," he said warmly, extending his hand. "We are pleased to finally do this in person." Naomi shook his hand calmly, while several board members greeted her with polite nods. Yet even standing there surrounded by executives and legal counsel, Naomi could still feel the weight of the lobby downstairs sitting in the back of her mind. The public search, the suspicion, the humiliation dressed up as procedure. Rachel Monroe suddenly appeared near the side entrance carrying a thin black tablet. "Everything is ready," she said quietly to Naomi. "Security footage has been archived. Access logs frozen. Legal has reviewed the timeline." Naomi nodded once. "And downstairs?" Rachel's expression sharpened slightly. "Word is spreading fast." Naomi took the tablet from her assistant just as the glass doors behind them opened again. Linda Whitmore entered the boardroom, trying desperately to regain her executive composure. Carl Benson and Derek Walsh followed several steps behind her, both looking pale under the bright overhead lights. The second they saw the full board standing around Naomi Brooks, their expressions changed completely. Linda stopped walking. For the first time all morning, she looked uncertain. Chairman Bell glanced toward her. "Linda," he said calmly, "we were just about to begin." Linda forced a tight smile. "Before we do," she said carefully, "there appears to have been some confusion downstairs involving building security." Naomi slowly turned toward her. The room became still immediately. Linda continued speaking carefully, trying to sound controlled. "Our team identified a possible access issue in the lobby and followed standard protocol." Naomi stared at her for a long moment before finally placing the black tablet down onto the boardroom table. "Protocol," she repeated softly. Then she pressed one button on the screen. Instantly, the massive wall monitor behind the boardroom lit up with silent surveillance footage from the lobby downstairs. Every executive in the room turned toward the screen as Carl searched Naomi's bag in front of dozens of employees, while Derek blocked her path to the elevators. Linda's face lost all remaining color. And Naomi finally spoke with the calmness of someone who no longer needed anyone's permission to own the room. "Let us talk about your protocol." The surveillance footage continued playing across the massive wall monitor while nobody inside the boardroom spoke. Every humiliating second from downstairs unfolded in sharp silence. Carl Benson emptying Naomi Brooks's bag across the granite table. Derek Walsh blocking her path to the elevators. Linda Whitmore standing nearby with folded arms while employees watched from a distance. No dramatic music. No raised voices. Just the cold reality of how quickly dignity disappeared once people decided someone did not belong. Chairman Arthur Bell slowly removed his glasses and stared at the screen with visible disbelief. "Is this authentic footage?" he asked quietly. Richard Holloway answered immediately. "Pulled directly from building security servers at 8:42 this morning." Linda shifted uncomfortably near the end of the table. "The situation is being taken completely out of context," she said carefully. Naomi turned toward her. Then give us the correct context. Linda inhaled slowly, choosing every word with corporate precision. Security identified irregular executive access and responded accordingly. Naomi nodded once. Interesting. She pressed another button on the tablet. A second video feed appeared instantly beside the first. Same lobby. Same morning. 3 white male executives walking through security less than 10 minutes before Naomi arrived. No searches. No questions. No blocked elevators. Carl barely looked up from his desk as they passed. The room went completely still. Naomi folded her hands calmly in front of her. So let us clarify the protocol. Nobody answered. Linda's face tightened. Derek looked like he wanted the floor beneath him to open. Carl stared directly at the wall monitor, now unable to look at anyone else. Naomi walked slowly toward the center of the boardroom, her heels barely making noise against the polished floor. You searched the black woman. Silence. You questioned the black woman. She looked directly toward Linda. You called the black woman suspicious. Chairman Bell shifted heavily in his chair. Naomi's voice never rose. That was what made it worse. And the only difference between me and the executives who walked through that lobby untouched, she continued, was that you could imagine them belonging here. Linda immediately shook her head. That is not fair. Naomi looked directly at her. Neither was this morning. The words landed like steel across the room. Rachel Monroe stepped quietly beside the boardroom monitor and opened another file. This time the screen displayed internal access records, timestamps, badge scans, elevator clearances. Naomi's credentials had registered as valid the entire time. Richard Holloway spoke carefully. Security verification recognized Miss Brooks immediately upon entry. Carl looked up suddenly. Wait. Richard's eyes moved toward him. The system cleared her badge before the search even began. Carl's face lost all remaining color. Derek whispered under his breath, "Oh my God." Linda tried one final time to regain control. There was confusion regarding executive transition identity. Naomi answered instantly. No. There was disbelief. Another silence followed, heavier than before. Naomi remembered being 19 years old inside a luxury department store in Atlanta, while security followed her through every aisle, because she carried herself with confidence they thought belonged to someone else. She remembered the employee who asked whether she could actually afford the watch she wanted to buy. Back then, humiliation burned hot and immediate. Now it burned colder, cleaner, more dangerous, because she finally understood something people like Linda Whitmore never did. Bias inside powerful institutions was rarely loud enough to call itself racism. It hid behind words like concern, policy, procedure, professionalism. Naomi stopped beside the head of the boardroom table and looked directly at every executive seated there. This company spent years investing in diversity reports, leadership seminars, inclusion initiatives, and public statements, she said calmly. And yet the first thing your organization did when a black woman arrived to lead it was search her like a threat. Nobody challenged her because nobody could. Linda lowered her eyes for the first time. All morning, Carl's hands shook slightly beside his chair. Derek looked physically ill. Naomi pressed one final button on the tablet. A document appeared across every monitor in the room. Executive transfer authorization. Ownership structure. Board signatures. Her name positioned clearly at the top beside the title Chief Executive Officer. Naomi looked directly at Linda Whitmore and finally delivered the sentence that shattered whatever illusion of control remained in the room. You searched the woman taking over your boardroom before breakfast. Nobody inside the boardroom moved after Naomi Brooks spoke. The sentence hung in the air like a final verdict. Carl Benson looked down at the floor as though eye contact itself had become impossible. Derek Walsh stood stiff beside the wall monitor with the expression of someone realizing too late that one careless morning had just destroyed years of employment. Linda Whitmore remained frozen near the end of the conference table, but the authority she carried downstairs was gone now. Completely gone. Chairman Arthur Bell slowly leaned back in his chair and removed both hands from the table. Richard, he said quietly, I want a formal review of this incident immediately. Richard Holloway nodded once. Already initiated. Naomi stayed standing at the center of the room while the surveillance footage replayed silently behind her. The image of Carl searching her bag in front of dozens of employees now looked even uglier inside the clean, polished boardroom. Every executive watching understood exactly what they were seeing. Not confusion. Not protocol. Assumption. Linda finally found her voice again. I think we are turning one unfortunate misunderstanding into something larger than it was. Naomi looked directly at her. Larger. Linda straightened slightly, trying to sound composed. No one intended discrimination. Naomi answered instantly. Intent does not erase impact. Silence again. Naomi slowly walked toward the long walnut conference table and placed both hands lightly against its surface. Do you know what the most exhausting part of this morning was? She asked calmly. Nobody responded. It was not being searched. Her eyes moved briefly toward Carl and Derek. It was realizing how comfortable everyone seemed while it happened. Several board members lowered their eyes. Naomi continued. Employees watched. Security participated. Leadership defended it. And the only person downstairs willing to question any of it was a junior assistant risking her own job. Chairman Bell looked toward Richard immediately. Who was the assistant? Rachel Monroe answered before anyone else could. Emily Carter from front reception. Naomi nodded once. Make sure she is protected from retaliation. Rachel typed something quickly into her tablet. Already done. Carl finally spoke, his voice unsteady now. Miss Brooks, I honestly did not know who you were. Naomi turned toward him carefully. That is the problem. Carl frowned slightly. Naomi's voice stayed calm, but sharper now. You believed respect depended on title confirmation. The room stayed silent as she continued. You did not search me because you knew who I was. You searched me because you decided who I could not possibly be. Derek shut his eyes briefly. Linda looked away entirely. Naomi remembered another moment years earlier when she walked into a private investors' dinner in Los Angeles, and a waiter handed her an empty tray because he assumed she worked service instead of owning one of the companies being discussed inside the ballroom. She remembered how fast apologies came once introductions started. That was the thing about power in America. People respected it most after they could attach it to wealth, status, or ownership. Humanity alone was rarely enough. Chairman Bell folded his hands slowly. Miss Brooks, he said carefully, on behalf of this board, I want to formally apologize for what occurred in our building this morning. Naomi acknowledged the apology with a small nod, but did not smile. Thank you. Then her eyes shifted toward Linda Whitmore again. But apologies without accountability are just public relations. Linda inhaled sharply. Arthur Bell turned toward Richard immediately. Effective immediately, placed Linda Whitmore on executive administrative suspension pending ethics review. Linda's face went pale. Arthur, you cannot be serious. But Richard was already typing into his tablet. A second later, Linda's company phone buzzed loudly against the conference table. Access restricted flashed across the screen in bright red letters. Carl's security badge buzzed next. Then Derek's. 3 separate tones. 3 separate careers collapsing in real time. Nobody in the room spoke while it happened. Naomi watched quietly as Linda stared at her locked phone in disbelief. No yelling. No dramatic celebration. Just consequences arriving exactly where dignity had failed. Rachel stepped beside Naomi again. Security credentials revoked, she confirmed softly. Executive systems frozen. Linda looked up slowly toward Naomi, her voice smaller now than it had been all morning. You are really going to destroy our careers over one mistake. Naomi met her eyes without blinking. No. The room became completely still again. Your decisions did that long before I walked through the lobby doors. The boardroom remained silent long after Linda Whitmore's phone screen faded dark in front of her. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan continued moving like nothing had happened. Yellow taxis pushed through wet streets. Steam rose from subway grates. Thousands of people hurried toward meetings they believed mattered. But inside Meridian Global's executive floor, something far more important had shifted. Naomi Brooks slowly walked toward the head chair at the end of the walnut conference table, while every executive in the room watched her differently now. Not cautiously, not skeptically. Clearly, the same woman security searched downstairs less than an hour earlier now stood at the center of the company's future. Rachel Monroe quietly gathered the suspension documents while Richard Holloway spoke with legal counsel near the windows. Carl Benson and Derek Walsh remained near the back wall, still stunned into silence. Linda Whitmore sat motionless, staring at the table in front of her as though she no longer recognized the room she once controlled. Naomi rested one hand against the back of the chairman's chair before speaking again. This morning was never about one lobby, she said calmly. Every eye turned toward her immediately. It was about culture. The room stayed silent. Naomi continued. Because systems do not fail by accident. They fail by repetition. Chairman Arthur Bell nodded slowly. Naomi looked around the table at the executives surrounding her. People learn what behavior is tolerated long before it is written into policy manuals. Her eyes briefly shifted toward the dark security footage still frozen on the monitor behind them. And downstairs, your employees learned that humiliation was acceptable as long as it was dressed up as procedure. Nobody interrupted her because nobody could. Naomi had spent years studying how powerful organizations protected themselves from accountability. They buried bias beneath professional language. They avoided obvious cruelty while rewarding quiet exclusion. They hired diversity consultants while ignoring the people already warning them there was a problem. Naomi remembered sitting in another boardroom years earlier listening to executives congratulate themselves for inclusion efforts while the only black woman at the table sat mistaken for administrative staff twice in the same afternoon. She remembered smiling through it back then because survival required restraint. But survival was no longer the goal. Change was. Naomi slowly took her seat at the head of the table. The symbolism was impossible to miss. Arthur Bell looked toward the room carefully. Effective immediately, he announced. Naomi Brooks assumes full executive authority as Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Global Holdings. Several board members nodded respectfully. One even began clapping softly before the sound faded into the quiet again. Naomi looked toward Rachel. I want mandatory ethics and executive accountability reviews implemented company-wide. Rachel typed immediately. Understood. I also want every lobby, security, and executive access interaction audited over the last 18 months. Richard looked up from his folder. That could expose serious liability. Naomi met his eyes calmly. Then perhaps serious problems exist. Carl lowered his head further hearing that. Naomi noticed, but did not linger. There. This was bigger than 3 people losing jobs. Bigger than one morning inside one building. That was the part organizations never understood. Every humiliation leaves a trail. Every quiet act of prejudice teaches someone nearby whether dignity is conditional. Emily Carter suddenly appeared hesitantly near the open boardroom doorway after being escorted upstairs by another assistant. She looked nervous standing there among executives and attorneys. Naomi immediately gestured her inside. Emily, she said warmly. Thank you for speaking up when it mattered. Emily swallowed hard. I almost did not. Naomi nodded once because she understood exactly what courage cost in places built around silence. Most people do not, Naomi answered gently. Then her voice strengthened again as she looked around the room one final time. Leadership is not tested by how you treat powerful people after you recognize them. The boardroom became completely still. Naomi's eyes moved briefly toward the frozen security footage behind her before returning to the executives seated around the table. It is tested by how you treat people before you know who they are. Nobody spoke after that because the truth inside the sentence was too heavy to escape. Outside the windows, the rain over Manhattan had finally started to clear. And inside Meridian Global, a company built on authority had just learned the difference between power and character.